Here we are, friends, my last day in Cuba. I'm sure you're wondering how I spent it, but I bet you wouldn't guess it would be by, theoretically, committing some minor infractions, subterfuge, sabotage. This particular episode will cover some of those kinds of need-to-know moments, you know? Oh, yeah, and maybe throw in my brief bout of recruitment by the CIA while we're at it.
Today, I can announce that the United States has agreed to formally reestablish diplomatic relations with the Republic of Cuba.
You know there's story going around about the CIA and they're trying to get, sending in the folks to get Castro.
Cuba maintains close relations with Russia and China, providing these actors with influence platforms to foment an anti-American agenda.
The Florida State Court has ruled on the case regarding temporary custody of Elian Gonzalez.
I think you ought to have that. It's incredible. I don't believe this thing in the world could. I don't think we ought to seriously consider it, but I think you ought to know about it.
The progress that we mark today is yet another demonstration that we don't have to be imprisoned by the past. When something isn't working, we can and will change.
My last day, or rather, morning in Cuba, was spent on a hunt. A hunt for art, as a matter of fact. I was determined to find a place where I could buy local art, made by local artists, rather than, those things that are mass-produced for tourists. I already had those types of trinkets for my family that I planned to give as Christmas gifts. But I also wanted to have something for myself, something that would stand the test of time and provide insight into the soul of local Cuban creatives. So I wandered around old Havana again, and eventually I find this awesome local art space, artist collective. They had original paintings and artwork for sale, and it was wonderful just to chat with the artists for themselves and find something to take home. There were two pieces that really stood out to me. This beautiful, colorful piece of Santa Maria in this stained glass view, very abstract, beautiful. And the other one of a man in a hat, kind of looking mysterious and trickster-like. Obviously, if you remember our previous episode about the ceiba tree, you'll know why I was drawn to that. Anyway, the thing is, I didn't have enough cash on me. However, the artist said that they had a digital workaround. I'm not going to be a narc, so I'm not going to name names or give you the intel about what it was exactly that would have allowed us to exchange funds digitally. It wouldn't matter in the end anyway, because the workaround, unfortunately, did not work. The platform in question had flagged their account just an hour prior to my conversation with them. It was so frustrating. And in fact, I will tell you all in a sec why it is particularly galling and relevant to something that happened to me today, the day I am recording this episode. So I looked at the two pieces I fell in love with, and I was resigning myself to just give up. But then I remembered that my aunt and uncle were coming to Cuba in just a few weeks. I asked the artists to set aside the pieces if they were willing to, and I would ask my family to come by and pay for them when they arrived. It was the best we could do it for the moment, and they agreed. They set aside those pieces and promised to keep them safe until my family could pick them up. But let's bring the embargo back up again. This is what is truly my problem. Because even though my family was able to pay for and bring those pieces back to the US, I have them both in my room right now, this situation made me furious. The embargo is, for lack of a better word, ridiculous. It is also so easily subverted. It is a patchwork of barriers that impede individuals rather than governments, and therefore it is security theater at best. I'll give you an example of how this works to this day, even though I have not been back to Cuba since. Yesterday, after weeks of long table readings and recording sessions with my cast for HAVANA Syndrome, I go ahead and try to pay them for their work. I try to be conscientious and make a note in the payments of what episode I'm paying for and for what show. Of course, this ended up being a huge mistake. This morning, I wake up to see that my bank has flagged that I used the term HAVANA Syndrome in my notes and blocked the payments. They sent me an email demanding that I explain exactly what I meant by HAVANA Syndrome, what the payment was for, and the full legal name, address, and location of the beneficiary. I simply laughed. Because, of course, this whole bag of nonsense would affect my fictional show. The unreality, the syndrome that I'm desperately trying to get to all of you listening to this, to understand why I'm writing about what I am writing about. I am very good at playing nice when I want something. It is probably why the CIA was initially interested in my application to the clandestine service. Oh yes, we will talk about it. I am not beholden to them, so I can. It makes sense why there is an embargo in place right now. As we've explored in previous episodes, the US had a stake in keeping the Soviet Union and its proxies at bay by financial and military means. The Cold War is also notorious for another particularly useful tactic, spycraft. Some people don't know that the CIA, as it's known today, has only been around since the 50s and has been through many iterations through World War II and the Cold War. Before the end of World War II, the intelligence apparatus in the U.S. was known as the OSS, the Office of Strategic Services. The history of the intelligence world is too long and convoluted to condense into one episode, but I believe this wraps up tightly with my own purpose. Why I went to Cuba. Why I wrote a spy thriller about a syndrome that has affected intelligence officers. And why I am willing to discuss this all with you right now. Obviously, the CIA was primarily driven by elected officials who were motivated to deal with the Soviet Union at the time, and like I said, their proxies like Cuba. Throughout history, there have been intelligence successes and intelligence breaches that tie a very frayed thread between the company, as they're sometimes called, and Cuba. When you talk about intelligence, you also have to understand that there are some interesting points regarding effectiveness. The CIA has notoriously been publicly seen as, well, if not ineffective, as immoral in the long run. The stakes of intelligence failure are catastrophic and life-threatening. Ana Montes, the Cuban-American defense intelligence analyst who operated for decades on behalf of the Cuban government, was likely responsible for revealing the identities of 4 undercover officers in Cuba. This same tactic has been used to kill people over the years. You just need to look at the 9/11 report to see how institutionally there have been real problems with the human or human intelligence facet of U.S. security theater. At the same time, it is obvious that there are catastrophes we will never know that the CIA has had its hand in thwarting intelligence successes. This is what drew me in initially as a fresh-faced graduate of international affairs and security studies. I read the memoirs, the stories that spoke to people who wanted to join the CIA. They were compelling. I wanted to be a part of the face of the new CIA, no longer burdened by harsh measures, aka sanctioned torture tactics, or Iran-Contra, or, everything they did in South America, but a place to protect people from terrorist attacks and violence around the world. I wanted to travel the world, to go to places that I otherwise wouldn't be allowed to go, talk to people, convince them that a better world is possible. Oh, yes, I know. The propaganda isn't even all that good. In any case, yes, I got through the interview stage for the clandestine service, the priesthood, as some call it. After failing the Foreign Service Officer test twice, I knew that this was the only other avenue to the big leagues when it comes to international affairs in the United States. Why else was I studying international affairs for 6 years? Well, I failed. I didn't move on past that stage. And I knew as soon as I left that interview room that I failed. But I will tell you why I now believe, in truth, that I passed. So, part of the interview was this role play, you see. The interviewers put you in a situation to act out, see how you respond. I was trained at improv. I was great at thinking on my feet. Or so I thought. Thing is, when I opened my mouth, I couldn't lie. I will be perfectly honest. Like I said, I have no trouble playing nice, lying, to get what I want. I have cheated and stolen, and I have friends who can attest that I have a damn good poker face. But no matter how much I tried in that little windowless interview room, I could not come up with a single lie on behalf of my country. Being rejected by the CIA stung, of course. It made me question my value. To be on a bigger stage in a bigger pond, I had thrown my eggs into the federal service basket, and I was deemed not good enough at all angles. An intelligence failure. On my last day in Cuba, I packed up my things, sans the artwork, but with memories and pictures and videos and trinkets and, metaphorically, some items that you usually could only source in Canada. Metaphorically. I would say these were spiritual items, traditional offerings in the New World, as it were, things you can smoke. Said items were split between my checked and carry-on bags, just in case one was compromised. Security, theater, right? Well, no one searched my bags. I managed to get everything, and I mean metaphorically everything, into the United States with no problem whatsoever. Just another intelligence failure, I suppose. There's a movie I watched on the plane heading home. The WASP Network. It was recommended to me by my Spanish tutor earlier that year. It's a spy thriller based on a true story of Cuban spies in the United States in the 1990s.
I guess you don't want to continue to employ the wife of a Cuban spy.
Look, as far as I know, you haven't been convicted of anything. So for me, first and foremost, you're a mother that has 2 children to feed. I've had my own problems with the FBI, and I know what scumbags those guys can be. So please go back to work.
It covers from the perspective of these Cuban spies the activities of the Cuban American National Foundation, or CANF, and the Hermanos pilots, 2 right-wing anti-Castro groups that supposedly were connected to the CIA, drug trafficking, and terrorist activities in Cuba, including a bombing campaign in Havana in 1997. This film, it's not an easy one to watch. For me, specifically, because I see my family in those radicalized, right-wing Cuban exiles. This is what makes these moments all more difficult to reconcile. I come from personal, familial, national, and international legacies that have lied, cheated, and stolen on so many levels. So many ways to get what we want, however we want it. I want to go back to how I'm feeling today. After seeing when I try to do what I want to do, I am punished for creating a story and doing it out in the open, under suspicion that I'm doing something illegal or wrong, especially if it has anything to do with Cuba. It's funny, on the one hand, to think that someone would believe I'm trying to do some shady dealings under the cover of a fictional production. Well, that's not unheard of, I guess. Huey Newton and the Big Cigar is evidence of that. But I feel like I still get to be angry and justified for continuing to do the work I want to do. I went to Cuba against the pressures of a world that doesn't want me to dig deep into what I found there. And they most certainly didn't want me to bring anything back. Too bad. I'm an intelligence failure. I am a storyteller. How's that for the dichotomy of truth and lies? In the last 3 episodes of Once Upon a Time in Havana, I'm going to talk a little bit more about what all of this means, what my trip means, what this history means, and what to expect from the future. Thank you for listening.